The machlokes was, when a person has a relationship with his sister, who is also the son of his father's wife, meaning that it's his brother and sister in the context of a married parents, so then the halacha is, according to the Chachamim, that you're over on two isurim, because there are two separate psukim. One is achoso, and the other one is basesha savicha, the daughter of your father's wife. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, no, the fact that the Torah says achos chahi in that very pasuk teaches you that you're only over on achoso, you're not over on anything else. So the Gemara's question was, well then, what's the purpose of saying that that type of sister is Esha Savichahi, that she is the daughter of your father's wife? What is that coming to teach? If it's telling me that if you're only being over on achoso, so then what is the point of telling me this superfluous information that does not contribute to her prohibited status? The Gemara had concluded that according to Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Yehuda, that added information is to teach me an additional halacha. And that is, when it's not possible for my father to be married to the mother of this girl, then she's no longer prohibited to me because of achosa. And the Gemara said that what that's referring to is a case of where the mother of this sister is a non-Jew, where either she's an indentured servant, of a non-Jewish indentured servant, or she's a free non-Jew. Either way, because she's the mother of my sister, she's not halachically my sister, and therefore if I have an encounter with her, I'm not oiver on the isser of achosa. That's what the words Eshes Avichahi mean. So the Gemara's next question is based on that whole premise. Ve'ema prat l'chai ve'lavin. If you're telling me that the Torah is telling me that any time a woman is not capable of being my father's wife, then her daughter is not asur mishum achoso, maybe any time that there's a prohibition of my father marrying that woman, that is tantamount to saying that she's not capable of being my father's wife. And therefore, in other words, the Gemara's havamina is, anytime the Torah says, thou shalt not marry this woman, there's no tfisas kiddushin. There's no marriage whatsoever. So, for example, if my father marries a mamzeres and they have a child, so then that child, that girl is not usher to me mishum achosa. The Gemara says no. Amar Rav Papa chayve lavin tafsi buhu kiddushin dichsiv. He says no, you can't say that because there is tfisas kiddushin, even though it's illicit, but it's still a marriage. And if the Torah is telling you you're not capable of having a marriage in that case, it can't be to the exclusion of an Isser Lav. So, and how do you know that there's still Tfisas Kiddushin for an Isser Lav? Because it says, D'chsiv ki sihiyena le'ish shtei nashim ha'achas ahuva ve'ha'achas sinua. Because the Torah says when a man shall have two wives, one is beloved and one is hated. Now notice the Torah doesn't say that the husband loves one and the husband hates one. It says in the passive, she's beloved and one is beloved and one is hated. So the fact that the Torah doesn't say who is the lover and who is the hater implies that she's universally loved and hated. How can you say that God would despise a woman? So what did she do that was so bad? Ella ahuva b'nisu'eha, sinua b'nisu'eha. The answer is that it's not that she's just the husband doesn't like her. It's that she is hated by God because of her sinful relationship with her husband. V'omer rachmana ki sihiyena. And the Torah yet says that she's still halachically married. So what you see from here is that you can have a halachic marriage even when it's illicit. Even when the Torah says don't do it, there's still something called tfisas kiddushin. So therefore the Torah cannot be excluding my sister from that relationship. Ve'ema prat l'chai ve'krisus, but maybe it's coming to exclude another relationship where there is no tfisas kiddushin, but still the mother is Jewish. In what case? Where there's an isser kares. So for example, let's say my father marries his mother, has an encounter with his mother-in-law, and he has a child as a result. So that child, which is my sister, maybe the Torah is excluding her from being a prohibition of achosa. So Amar Rava, Amar Kra, Ervas achoscha vasavicho vasimecha moledes bayis o moledes chutz. So to that, Rava says no. The Torah cannot be excluding that achoso from an Isser achoso, because the Torah says the erva of your sister, who's the daughter of your father or the daughter of your mother, regardless of whether she's born in the house or regardless of whether she's born out of the house. Now, what does being born out of the house mean? Bein she'amr lo le'avicha kayem, bein she'amr lo le'avicha hotzei. Regardless of whether you tell the father to keep the wife or tell him to remove the wife, in other words, to eject the wife out of the house, in either way, she's still your achoso. So what you learn from that pasuk is that even in a situation where the Torah says you're not halachically able to be married to that woman, that the daughter is still achoso. V'amar rachmana achoschahi, and it's still your sister. So the Gemara's then question is, Ema bein she'omer lo, and the Rashash changes the gears here, bein she'omrim lo le'avicha kayem, bein she'omrim lo le'avicha hotzei, va'omer rachmana achoschahi l'rabos achosa mishchifa v'obedes kol chavim. But the Gemara says, well, by that very same token, if you're telling me that that pasuk implies that the sister is your sister, regardless of whether she was born from a relationship where the husband has to eject his wife from the house or not, well, then maybe it would also be to the inclusion of a sister that's born to be by a non-Jew. And you're telling me that that's excluded. So why are you including an Isser Kares and you're excluding an Isser, a daughter that's born from a non-Jew? Maybe the Torah is also including a daughter born from a non-Jewish woman, also is my sister. Amar Kra bas eshes avicha misha yesh lo ishus leavicha ba prad la'achos meshivcha ve'obedes kol chavim. So that's why you have the other pasuk. The Torah says that she has to be the daughter of your wife, meaning that she has to be capable of being your father's wife in order to be under the Isser of Achosa. So the Gemara basically is really telling us we have two psukim that contradict each other. One pasuk says that even when your father is connected to a woman that he's not capable of being married to, the daughter that's born from that relationship is still usher to you because of Achosa. The other pasuk seems to be saying just the opposite, that she's not usher because of Achoso. And therefore we're saying we're including in the Isser of Achoso, when your father has a daughter through an Isser Kares, but the woman is still Jewish, we're excluding the case of where your father has relationship with a non-Jew, in which case there's no Isser of Achoso. So the Gemara's question is, Uma Rois, what's the logic of including one and excluding the other? Maybe say vice versa. The Gemara says, "Mistavra chayve krisus havale l'rabos shekain tafsi bahen kiddushin la'alma." The logic is like this: it makes more sense to say that the Torah is including a woman who's a chiyuv kares to the father, because at least, even though she's usher to the father, but by virtue of the fact that she's Jewish, she's allowed to marry every other Jewish man. Where by contrast, a non-Jewish woman is not only usher to my father, but she's also usher to every other Jewish man. So that's the logic. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, Adarabba, Shivcha v'obedes kol chavim havalei l'rabos d'imagaira l'didei nami tafsi b'kiddushin. But I could argue the opposite logic, which is that this non-Jewish woman, were she to convert, she would be able to marry my father legally. Whereas a woman who's a chiyuv kares to my father, there's nothing that she can do to change her status. There's no change that she can make to her status. She's permanently usher to my father. So therefore, there's more of a reason to include a non-Jewish woman and to exclude a chiyuv kares. The Gemara says, no, that's not a good argument. That no, when a non-Jewish woman converts, is like she becomes a new person. So that's not a valid argument. The very fact that right now she's not Jewish and she's not marriageable to my father or to any other Jewish man is the operative argument, and that's why we exclude her and we don't exclude the chiyuv kares. You're going to argue the fact that she could always convert. When she converts, she's a totally different human being. She doesn't count as the same person that she was before she converted.
But the child from the pre-conversion relationship
is not Jewish.
It retains the status, right?
Yeah, of course. So now the Gemara now says, okay, we've explained Rabbi Yossi Bar Rabbi Yehuda as to why he holds that there's only one Isser, which is Achoso, and he uses the pasuk of Esha Savicha to tell me that when the father has a relationship with a non-Jew, the daughter that's born from that is not Asr Mishum Achoso. The Gemara now says, V'Rabbanan l'Me'utei Shivcha v'Vedes Kolcha v'Minalu. The question now is, where do the Chachamim get this halacha? That if a man has a relationship with a non-Jew, the daughter is not Asr Mishum Achoso. So Nafgalu me ha'isha viladeha tihi ala doneha. He derives it from the fact that in all situations where a man has an encounter with a non-Jewish woman, the child is not considered to be his. Because the Torah says that when a Hebrew slave is given a Canaanite wife to produce children with, then both the woman and her offspring belong to her master, but have no connection to the Hebrew slave, to the father. So therefore you see that they're not even considered his children, and therefore, by that argument, any other sons that this man has are not related to the offspring that he has from a non-Jewish woman. And that's why there's no Isser of Achoso. V'Reb Yossi v'Reb Yehuda chad b'shivcha v'chad b'vedes kolchavim utzrichi. And Reb Yossi, Reb Yehuda agrees that pasuk is necessary. But he says you need an additional pasuk to tell you that not only when a woman is a slave that her children are not attributable to the father, but also when she's a free Gentile, that the children are not attributable to the father. And why is that? Because if I only had a pasuk by a Gentile slave to tell me that the children are not attributable to the father, maybe that's only true because we view a shivcha as having no lineage or pedigree whatsoever. We view her as being chattel, livestock, just like an animal, because she's the possession of another human being, and therefore that's why there's no yichus, there's no lineage that is traceable to the father. And Rashi says the way we know this is because Avraham said to his two servants, "Shavu po im hachamor." By Akedas Yitzchak, he said to his two servants, "Stay here with the donkey." So he compared them to a donkey in the sense, not that they're not intelligent, not that they're beasts of burden, not that this is an anti-Gentile canard, but rather it just means to imply that they don't have any yichus, they don't have any lineage that we can trace them to be able to create a connection to them. But by a free Gentile, there is yichus. How do we know that there's yichus? Because we look in Tanakh and we see that when the Torah lists the names of Gentile rulers and other Gentiles, it says so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. So you see that there is a line of pedigree, there is a line of lineage, and therefore you could argue, since there is this concept of yichus by Gentiles as well, as long as they're not slaves, maybe a man who has a child through a free Gentile woman, the child is attributable to the father. And vice versa. We go to the other direction. If the Torah would have only told me that a child that you have through a free Gentile woman is not attributable to you, that might not have been indicative about the status of a child that you have with a slave Gentile. And why is that? Because a slave Gentile, at least she's chayiv in a certain scope of mitzvahs. We know that any time a person is an eved or shivcha kenani, they have to observe mitzvahs aseh shelo hazman grama, that non-time bound mitzvahs are applicable to that person. And maybe that's enough of a reason to say that if she has a child, that the child is attributable back to the father because she's connected in some way to Yahadus. So therefore you need both psukim. So now let's go back to the Chachamim. They only have the pasuk that talks about a slave woman, that the children are attributable to the father. How do they know that a free non-Jewish woman, the children are not attributable to the father? And you can't tell me that you're going to learn it out from Shivcha, as we've just demonstrated. Just because you know about a Shivcha doesn't necessarily reflect upon a free non-Jewish woman. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon ben Yochai Amar Kra Ki Osiris bincha me'acharai bincha me'Yisraelis kori bincha ve'ein bincha habamin ha'ovedes kochavim kori bincha ela binah. So we learned this pasuk already. The Torah had told us that when you come into the land of Canaan, you shall not let your son marry his daughter, nor shall you allow your daughter marry his son. And the reason is, Ki yasir es bincha me'acharai, because he will turn your grandson away from me. Meaning that in the case where your daughter marries a Gentile Canaanite, your son-in-law will turn your grandson away from me. The Torah's only concern is that your Jewish grandson will be turned towards idolatry as a result of having an idolatrous father. But the Torah is not concerned about the converse, that when your son is married to a Gentile woman, that she will turn your grandson's heart away from Hashem. Why is the Torah not concerned about that? Because he's not Jewish, he's not your grandson. And therefore you don't have to worry about him. He's not attributable back to you. He's not part of the Jewish people anymore. So that's how you know that even if the woman is a free woman, if she's the mother, the children are not Jewish and they're not attributable to the father at all. So Amar Ravina Shma Mina Ben Bitcha Haba Min Ha'ovi Kolchavim Kari Bincha. You see from here, from that pasuk, that a grandson that is born from a Gentile father is still called your grandson, to the point where he's a kosher Jew. So Lema Kesava Ravina Obi Kolchavim Ve'eved Habal Bas Yisrael Havlad Kosher. And this is how we paskin, that if a non-Jew has relations with a Jewish woman, the offspring is a full-fledged Jew. It's not a mamzer, it's a kosher Jew. So the Gemara says, well, not really. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. Nihi de mamzer lohavi, kosher nami lohavi, Yisrael pasul mikri. We don't call him a mamzer, so therefore halachically he's still a kosher Jew. But at the same time, we still have to call him a pasul Yisrael. We call him an invalid Israelite. The Gemara doesn't go into any more detail into what sense he's pasul, but he certainly doesn't have a tribal portion, and there may be other kinds of taint that adhere to him because of the fact that his father is a Gentile, which would have to be discussed in the poskim. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute, I still have a problem with this source text that you're providing to me, that the child of a non-Jewish woman, even though she's free, is attributable only to the mother and not to the father, because Hai b'shiva umos ksiv. But that pasuk is talking about marrying your son to one of the 7 Canaanite nations that are indigenous to the Middle East. How do you know that it's inclusive of all Gentiles? A European Gentile, an African Gentile, a Western Hemisphere Gentile. How do you know that all of those are included in this pasuk? So the Gemara says, Ksiv ki yasir l'rabos kol ha-mesirim. I'm sorry, ki yasir l'rabos kol ha-mesirim. Because the Torah says, because he will turn your grandson's heart away. And therefore, anyone who is going to turn your grandson's heart away is included in this prohibition. Any idolater. They don't have to be indigenous to the Middle East. So the Gemara says, Hanicha Rabbi Shimon the Dorish Taimei Dekra, Ela Rabbanan Minalahu. So the Gemara says, but that's only going to work according to Rabbi Shimon. Now this is a much lengthier discussion. There's a basic machlokus between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim as to whether or not Darshinan Taimei Dekra. Are we able to explain or extrapolate or infer the reason why something is permitted or prohibited in the Torah? Rabbi Shimon says yes. And therefore, like for example, when the Torah says, send away the mother bird, Reb Shimon says it's perfectly appropriate to explain that you're supposed to have compassion on all of God's creatures. The Chachamim disagree and say, no, you're not allowed to exposit on that at all. But so therefore, according to Reb Shimon, who says, Darshinan Taimei Dekra, there really is no reason for the Torah to explain to you the reason, because that's already implicit. He says by every mitzvah, there's an implicit reason that you're supposed to expound upon. Therefore, anytime the Torah tells you the reason explicitly, because such and such and such, it's extraneous for you to be able to derive additional halacha from that reason. So therefore, over here, Reb Shimon would say, why does the Torah give you explicitly the reason when it's already implicit? Because it's to teach you that it's not just applicable to the 7 indigenous nations, it's applicable to all Gentiles who are idolaters, right? But that works out according to Reb Shimon, that this pasuk therefore is inclusive of all heathens. But what are you going to say according to the Rabbanan, who say lo darshinan taimei dekra, and therefore these words are not extraneous in order to allow you to extrapolate beyond the 7 indigenous nations. Mantana depola galei de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Reb Shimon he. So the Gemara says you're right. This pasuk cannot be used by the Chachamim who argue with Reb Shimon. So you have to say that the Rabbanan who argue with Reb Yossi Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa that we've been dealing with hold like Rabbi Shimon. That Reb Shimon is the one who says that since Darshinan Taimei Dekra, I hold that this pasuk of Ki Osiris bin Chameyacharai is the source text to tell me that when you have a child through a non-Jewish woman, no matter where she comes from, the child is not Jewish. And therefore, you don't need the pasuk by Achoscha to teach me that. It teaches me that when a man takes his sister, who's also the daughter of his father's wife, you are over on two things. Okay, let's go on to the next Mishnah. I was looking at this a little bit past midnight last night, and I said, the gift of Yevamos that keeps on giving. Because it's one of these, once again, one of these complicated, permutated Mishnayos. So put on your seatbelts and let's get going. Okay. Misha Kidesh Echas Mishtei Achayos. That if a man gives Kiddushin to two sisters, but he's not sure which one. In other words, a guy, it must have been some wild party. He gives Kiddushin.
Identical twins.
Could be they're twins.
There's no lights in the cave.
Right. There's no lights in the cave, whatever it is. He gives Kiddushin.
Is it the Rachalea thing?
It's the Rachalea thing. Okay. He gives Kiddushin, right, he could have had Lovin as a father-in-law. He gives Kiddushin to one of two sisters, and he's not sure which one he presented Kiddushin to. So it's a suffix which sister he's married to. So he can't live with either of them, because it's a suffix whether it's Achos Ishto. So therefore, the only option for him is that he has to divorce both of them. So therefore, no saying get lezuva, get lezuva. He's got to give a get to each one. Now, let's say it's a misafik. I'm married to one. I'm not married to the other, so I'll give a get to both. Right?
If one of them says it was me and the other one says it wasn't.
Which one did I refer
So let's say they both claim that they're the one.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what's complicated. That's right. That's right. That's right. Cut him in half. Meis velo ach echad choletz l'shtein. Now, what happens if this guy dies before he has a chance to give a get to each one? So he leaves over a brother. So Reuven is suffix. He's not sure whether he gave kiddushin to Rachel or to Leah, and then Reuven dies. Shimon now has a mitzvah of yibum to one of these women. We don't know which one he has a mitzvah of yibum to. So therefore, choletz l'shtein. He has to give chalitza to both. Now, why does he have to give chalitza to both? The answer is because let's say he gives chalitza to Rachel first. So Rachel is either the right woman, and therefore he's fulfilled his mitzvah. But on the other hand, he can't do yibum with her because maybe she's achos zekukaso. She may be the sister of the woman that he has zika with in the case that she's not the Yevama. She may be the sister of the Yevama, in which case he can't marry her. So the only option is to give her chalitza. Once he's given her chalitza, then why not marry the other sister? Well, what if she's the Yevama? And if she's the Yevama, so you could say, well, so then what I did for this sister is meaningless, and I'll do yibum, but that won't work. Because in the event that the first woman was truly the Yevama, then this woman is achos zekukaso, even though there's no more zika, because I gave this first sister chalitza. Rashi says midarabanan were gozer. Midarabanan were gozer on the other sister as well. Like Rashi says, asuralo midarabanan bichayeha, as long as the sister is alive. V'yavume bereisha namilo dedim. Right. So he says we don't allow you to do yibum with that woman, even though you may have already done chalitza with the proper Yevama, because she is the sister of the woman that you had zika with. Okay? But it only applies when there's a case of one brother, as you'll see in just a minute. When there's two brothers, the halacha will change. Hayulo shnayim. Now let's say Reuven dies in the very same case, but the only thing that's different is that instead of having only one brother, Shimon, he leaves over two brothers, Shimon and Levi. So echad choletz ve'echad miyabing. That in that situation, Shimon does chalitza first, and then Levi can actually do yibum. And the way that you look at it is that Shimon can't, the first brother, he can't do yibum, because maybe the woman that he wants to be intimate with is achos zekukasa, the sister of the Yevama. So that he can't do. So therefore he's got to give chalitza. But once he's given chalitza, then Levi looks at the remaining sister and says, look, either she never fell to yibum, in which case perfectly fine for me to marry her, But the other alternative, maybe she's the Yevama. Well, if she's the Yevama, then I'm going to do proper Yibum to her. What are you worried about? Maybe she's the sister of the other woman who's the Yevama, and there was Zika, but the Zika is now off. Once the Zika is off, I'm allowed to marry her. In other words, in the previous case, even though the Zika is off, since I'm the person who did the Chalitza, I can't do, the rabbis were geyser that I cannot marry since I did an act of Chalitza with the sister, I cannot do an act of marriage to this woman who is the sister of the woman that I had a Zika with, because it was a very strong Zika, because I'm the only brother. But when there are two brothers, the Zika is not strong enough to say that even after the Zika is removed, it remains as a permanent stigma. So therefore, if my brother did Chalitza with the sister who was the Yevama, it's permitted for me as the other brother to do a marriage with the remaining sister. Either because she's the true Yevama, in which case what my brother did was irrelevant, or in the case where the other girl was the Yevama, my brother did Chalitza, the Zika is now off, and I can go ahead and marry this girl. Stop.
That would have to be through Bia as opposed to Kesef and Shtar?
Well, even Kesef and Shtar, if it's real Yibum, you're kind of midirabanan, but you wouldn't be considered midaraisa until you consummate it through Bia.
Does he need kavana to do Yibum, or is just getting married?
We'll tell him, go ahead and marry her, and have in mind, misafek, have in mind the mitzvah of Yibum. Kadmu v'kansu rather, ein motziin miyada. And now we go even further, and we say that in a case where there are two brothers, Shimon and Levi, if, let's say, Shimon went ahead and violated the halacha and went ahead and married the one sister instead of doing chalitza with her, and then Levi went ahead and married the second sister, so we would say, b'di'eved, now that Levi has married the second sister and there's for sure no longer any Zika, so we'll let Shimon remain married to the other sister that he did Yibum with illegally. Because the only reason why it was illegal is because maybe she's achos zekukaso, the sister of the Yevama. Well, in that situation, now that Levi has married the Yevama and he's removed the Zika post facto, it's legal now for Shimon to be married to that girl. Okay, now we're going to see further permutations of the same case. Shnayim shekidshu shtei achayos. Now let's say we have two guys who are not brothers. Let's say we have Reuven and Moshe. Okay, Reuven and Moshe are not brothers. And they go ahead and they present Kiddushin to two girls who are sisters, Rachel and Leah. But neither of them remember which one they gave Kiddushin to. Reuven doesn't remember whether he married Rachel or Leah, and Moshe also doesn't remember whether he married Rachel or Leah. Ze'eni yodeya eza kidesh, ze'eni yodeya eza kidesh. Ze nosein shnei gitin, ze nosein shnei gitin. So in that situation, really we're just... it's really the same principle. Each one, both Reuven and Moshe, have to give two gittin, one to each sister, because we're not sure which one I'm married to. Mesu, now if both Reuven and Moshe die, laze'ach v'laze'ach, and let's say each one has one brother. Reuven has a brother Shimon, Moshe has a brother Aharon. So in that situation, zeh choyleitz lishteihem v'zeh choyleitz lishteihem. So then each one has to give chalitza to both sisters, just like we saw in the Reisha. Okay? Lazeh echad v'lazeh shnayim. But now let's complicate it one step further. What happens if Reuven only has Reuven has two brothers? He has Shimon and Levi, and Moshe only has one brother. He only has Aaron as his brother. In that situation, hayachid choletz lishteihem, because there's strong zika from Moshe's widow to Aaron, the sole brother, he has to give chalitza to both girls. We're not sure which one is the Yevama. And v'hashnayim echad choletz ve'echad miyabim. And as far as Reuven, who left over two brothers, so the halacha reverts back to what we said in the simple case. The first brother, Shimon, can do chalitza to one, and Levi can do yibum to the other. Now, kadmu v'kansu, ein motzin miyadam. And also, if b'di'evet, Shimon goes ahead and does Yibum with the first sister, and then Levi does Yibum with the second sister, we don't require Shimon to divorce the first sister. Okay. Now, let's go to the next permutation. Lazeh shnayim v'lazeh shnayim. Let's say both decedents leave over two brothers. So Reuven leaves over Shimon and Levi, and Moshe leaves over Aharon, and we'll just say Kahas, just as the Stama name, right? So Moshe leaves over Aaron and Kahas, Shimon leaves over Levi. Reuven leaves over Shimon and Levi. So Echav shel zeh choleitz le'echas, the Echav shel zeh choleitz le'echas. I'm sorry, I should really read it as Achiv shel zeh choleitz le'echas, the Achiv shel zeh choleitz le'echas. Achiv shel zeh miyabim chalutzaso shel zeh, the Achiv shel zeh miyabim chalutzaso shel zeh. So the way you work it is you mix and match. So the way it works is like this. So let's look at Reuven first. Reuven died. Shimon has to present chalitza to Rachel, and then Aharon will present chalitza to Leah. Then Levi can do yibum to Leah, who got chalitza from Aharon, and Kahas can do yibum with Rachel, who got chalitza from Shimon. In other words, the second brother of each decedent is allowed to do yibum with the woman who got chalitza from the other brother's family. That's the way it'll work. In other words, we allow two yibums in that situation, just basically making the case just more complex, but using the same principle that mimonavshach, no matter how you look at it, the second sister after the first brother gave chalitza is permitted for yibum, either because she's the yevama or because she's a sister of someone who used to be a yevama but there's no longer any zika. So kodmu shnayim v'cholzu lo yibamu hashnayim ela echad choletz ve'echad miyabe. Now, if two of the brothers, Shimon and Levi, both did chalitza, this does not give a license to the two living brothers of Moshe, Aaron and Kahas, to both do yibum. You can't say that. But rather, the first one will do chalitza and the second one will do yibum. And kadmu v'kansu ein motzin miyadam. And finally, like we said before, if both brothers, however, do yibum, like in other words, Shimon and Levi both did chalitza, and then Aaron and Kahas both decide to marry both sisters, we don't b'diavad force them to divorce them, because at worst it's achos chalutzaso, that Aaron went ahead and married the sister of the Yevama, but once Kahas married the other sister, the Zika went off, and b'diavad it's legal for him to be married to her.
Chalitza doesn't remove the suffix, it just makes it permissible, really.
Chalitza doesn't remove the suffix. You're never going to know which sister was married, but it removes the Zika.
Right.
Okay. The Gemara now says, Shma mina, the first thing we want to infer from this whole discussion is Kiddushin she'ein mesurin l'biyah havi Kiddushin. Now this Gemara is presenting this as a question, but what we can infer from this Mishnah is that if a man presents Kiddushin to a woman in such a way where there's no way to consummate the marriage, because I don't know, because of the doubt that I have, I'm not allowed to have a physical encounter with this woman, so then it's still a valid Kiddushin. Now, why is that an important issue? Because this is debated in Maseches Kiddushin as to whether it's even a valid Kiddushin. So if, let's say, I present Kiddushin to a woman, and at the time I present the Kiddushin, because of a doubt that arises at that moment, there's no way for me to ever consummate the marriage, because maybe she's my wife's sister. Now, there's one opinion in Kiddushin that says that's bichlal not a Kiddushin. There's not even Tfisas Kiddushin in that case. There's another opinion that says that there is. From this Mishnah, you can infer that there is Tfisas Kiddushin, so it's a kasha on the other opinion that says that there's no Tfisas Kiddushin. So the Gemara has to defend that position. So hacha b'mayaskinan kishuhukru ulabasof nisarvu. No, we're talking about that originally the person who presented Kiddushin to one of the two sisters knew which sister it was. Mm-hmm. So it could have been via proxy. Let's say a guy says, I want you to go ahead and present Kiddushin to the Schwartz girl. Okay? So the Shliach goes to the Schwartz family and he finds two girls. So he says, okay, I'll give Kiddushin to the brunette, even though there's a blonde. One of the sisters is blonde, one of the sisters is brunette. I'll give Kiddushin to the brunette. Then by the time the Shliach gets home, he's had a couple of drinks, and the guy says, okay, which one did you marry? He says, I can't remember whether it was the blonde or the brunette. I don't know.
She said yes.
But at one time, he did know. So in that situation, everyone in Maseches Kiddushin would agree that that's a valid Kiddushin. It's only the question that only arises in Maseches Kiddushin is if at the time of Kiddushin, the marriage was not consumable. But here, the marriage was consumable at the time of Kiddushin, because you knew exactly who was the married lady and who was her sister. So therefore, this is not entering into that machlokas in Maseches Kiddushin. Di kanami de katani ve'enu yodeya v'lo katani ve'enu yodua shmamina. And we can infer that from the language, because it says that he doesn't know in the present tense which one is his wife, which implies, it doesn't say that it's unknown. The implication being that it used to be known, but only currently it's not known. And that proves our point that at one time the person who was the husband knew, or had the ability to know, which one was his wife and which one was the sister. Now, the Gemara continues and it says, Umay kamash malan. So the question now is, what's the chiddush of our Mishnah? It can't be the fact that if a man is mesupik, which sister he's married to, he has to present a get to each one. That's self-evident. It's achos, possibly achos ishta. So the Gemara says, seifa strichale. The chiddush is the seifa. Meis v'loach echad choleitz lishtehen. That if the guy who's the safek dies and he leaves over a brother, the guy's got to give chalitza to both sisters. And hayulo shnayim echad choleitz v'echad miyabim. And if he leaves over two brothers, then the first brother gives chalitza, the second brother does yibum. And the chiddush of the Mishnah is davka michlatz v'hadar yevume. Abol yevume b'reish lo dekapaga ba'achaz zekukaso. That it has to be in that order. Shimon has to first give chalitza, and only then afterwards can Levi do yibum. Because if Shimon would do yibum first, then the potential is that he's being intimate with the sister of a woman who's the Yevama, that where there's Zika, and that's not legal. So therefore, it's the chiddush of the Mishnah is first the brother has to do chalitza, and only the second brother can do yibum. Let's go. Vayter shnaim shekidshu shtei achayos. Two brothers who marry, not two brothers, sorry, two guys, Reuven and Moshe, who they're mesupik, which sister they're married to. So Shema Mina Kedushin Shein Masurin Labiyah Habi Kedushin. The Gemara asks the exact identical question on the second case of our Mishnah. It seems from here that even if the marriage, the Kedushin, is never consumable because you don't know who you're married to and you'll never be able to consummate it physically, it seems from here that it's a valid Kedushin. Kasha on that one opinion in Maseches Kedushin. So the Gemara says no. Hachanami kishuhukru ulabasof nisarvu. Here too we're talking about a case where at the time of Kiddushin it was known which sister was married to which guy, and then it got mixed up. Dikanami dekatani ve'ein yodeya v'lo katani ve'ein yadua shmamina. And it's the same inference from the language. It doesn't say that it's totally unknown. It says he does not know presently, which implies that previously he did know, and that's the chiddush. Umay kamash malan. So now the question is, what are you adding in this second case that I didn't know from case number one, which was the simple case? The Gemara answers, seifa itztarichale. That chiddush is the next part. Meisu lozeh echad v'lozeh shnayim. That in the case where both Reuven and Moshe die, and Reuven leaves over two brothers, and Moshe leaves over one brother, hayachid choletz lishtein, v'ashnaim echad choletz v'echad miyabem. That in the case of Moshe, where he leaves only one brother, Aaron, he has to give chalitza to both sisters. And Reuven, who leaves over two brothers, Shimon does chalitza and Levi does yibum. But the Gemara says pshita, hainu reisha. But the Gemara says, but both cases were already addressed in the Reisha. What are you adding to the complexity here that I didn't already know from the simple case where there's only one man who dies? So the Gemara answer is, Mahu detema ligzor trei atuchad kamash malan. The Gemara says, because you might have thought that in this case, where you have two sets of brothers, where one brother can only do chalitza, because he's the sole brother, and therefore there's a strong zika to both sisters, potentially, or misafek. And the other cases where there's two brothers, maybe over here the rabbis would be gozer, that since one decedent has only brother who can only do chalitza, we should be gozer the same thing to the guy, to Reuven, who leaves over two brothers. Even though in a situation where Reuven is the only decedent, we would allow Shimon to do chalitza and we would allow Levi to do yibum, but maybe you could have argued that in this case, since Moshe's brother Aaron can only do chalitza, we should be gozer that Reuven's brother should only allow to do chalitza, kamash malan. That's the chiddush. V'davka michlatz v'hadar yevume evol yevume b'reish lo dekapaga b'yevam l'shuk. And once again, we just want to emphasize that we have to make sure that Shimon first does chalitza and then Levi does yibum, because if you did it the opposite case, then it's a problem of achos zekukaso, or what's also possible, not only achos zekukaso is a problem, but also Yevama l'shuk, because what would happen if Shimon, if Moshe dies, and Aaron didn't do chalitza yet to either sister, we wouldn't allow Shimon to do chalitza to one and Levi to do yibum to the other, because maybe the one that Levi wants to do yibum with was really the Yevama of Moshe, in which case it's not legal for Levi to marry her until Aharon does chalitza to her. So therefore we have to wait till Aaron does chalitza to both, and then we have to then tell Shimon to do chalitza to one, and then we can tell Levi to do yibum to the other. So lazeh shnaim v'lazeh shnaim, that case we'll leave Emir Tzashem for tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.